Hey everyone, welcome to Algolia DevCon. I am so stoked to be here. I'm so stoked you are here to talk a little bit about scaling culture in a remote world. But I want to start by introducing myself. So, hi, I'm Ricky, and I am a developer. I started coding in middle school and fell in love with it and knew that it was going to be part of my life. But I grew up in Missouri. And when I was growing up, being a developer wasn't cool. It meant like sitting in a cubicle with a pocket protector. And it just wasn't a culture I thought I would fit in with. And it took me a long time to feel like I could step into the world of professional developers and that there was a place for me. And 15 years later, here I am. And actually, I've now moved into a role focused on culture, which is completely unexpected. And I'm excited to share with you all a little bit of my journey of a developer who now spends my time thinking about culture all day. But what I really want to do is just share with you three stories. So the first story is going to be the one with the submarine. The second is going to be the one during the ice storm. And the last is going to be the one about my dad. So we can start with the one with the submarine. And this is really a story about values. There's a lot of definitions of what culture is or how you define it. And I like to think that culture is when your values come to life. So whether those values are written down or they're not written down, every group of people has some set of unifying values, and that culture is seeing those come to life. And I think those are more apparent and more important when things go wrong. So this is a story about things going wrong. So here on the right is actually what's called an open ROV. It's a remote operated vehicle. It's kind of like an underwater drone. So I say submarine to keep it simple, but precisely it's more like an underwater drone. And what happened is my colleague Brent and I were going to a conference called That Conference that happens at a water park. And we wanted to do something special for the conference. And so we integrated with the open ROV and let people text with it, where it would send a picture back from underwater when they texted. And we spent weeks leading up to the conference working on this. And then, at the conference, we were actually in our room, like testing it in the bed, in the bathroom, in the bathtub. The last night of the conference is when we were going to deploy it into the water, and everyone was gathered round, and we were excited, and we got it in. And you can see I'm very excited in this picture on the left because it's before we got it too deep into the water. And about 5 minutes in, it stopped responding, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And we pulled it out of the water, and it is filled in that inner tube with all the electronics with water. So we had to not just like write the software, we had to build the hardware. And we, deployed this, and we didn't have a backup. I know we've all kind of been there where it's like, oh my gosh, we have no backup. We have no backup server. We have no backup, underwater drone. And we had to kind of like call it because it was completely destroyed and go back to our rooms and think about what had happened. And as we were walking back, we were sad, but we thought about this idea at Twilio called Draw the Owl. And we thought this is a Draw the Owl moment. And that's one of our values at Twilio. And so, as a developer, when I start a new piece of software, I open Vim. I still use Vim. As you can see, I'm a PHP developer, so I have a blank file. And the first thing you do is you start like naming your variables. And I remember when I started coding, it was like A equals, whatever. And then, you learn about foo and you learn about bar, and you're like, you feel pretty cool. You're like, foo equals whatever. And then I remember in high school, actually, someone in my AP computer science class, all the variable names were famous cats. So they had like Garfield and Scratchy. And that's really cool. The freedom is amazing until you realize like someone else needs to read that code, and they have no idea what Scratchy actually is. And so you start to get more precise around how you name your variables. And I think of values is the same way. So we've all kind of walked into an office and seen like the generic poster with a value. Actually, I use a Dolly to generate this image. So if you want to try to make your own and you have access to Dolly, this is a light bulb above someone's head when they have an idea, and you see like a generic image with like creativity above it. And the tough thing is like, that's kind of the foo of values. It's like, oh, creativity, with a generic image. What does that really mean? And so I mentioned draw the owl, and where this came from at Twilio is this meme of how to draw an owl. You draw some circles and then you draw the rest of the owl. And the purpose behind this is that we are trying to do things that haven't been done before, that there is no instruction booklet. No one has built an underwater drone that you can text with before. And so that means you're going to have to figure it out, and figuring it out means sometimes you're going to fail. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. It's not going to look like an owl. It's going to look like something else. And it's not just Twilio. I love Airbnb has embraced the adventure, right? And some of the similar themes here. So, there's curiosity, there's optimism, there's that belief in growth, that even, when things don't go well, you still grow. Actually, would encourage you all to read this because it's fun. I went to the naming convention Wikipedia page for programming, and I won't make you read all this, but like I said, it's very fun. But the thing that's true of this is that every language has different naming conventions, and even the article talks about within a language, different companies have different naming conventions, and values are the same way. So like I used two examples that were kind of more flowery or fun language, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I love Algolia has humility as one of their values, and getting to speak at this conference, it was so obvious that this is a value that they really live, that it really does come to life. Even as we're talking about the content, they're like, don't make it about Algolia, make it about empowering the people who are watching, who are at the conference. And that humility just, was ever present in all the interactions I've had with Algolia. And so it doesn't have to be draw the owl. It can even be something like humility, just like, every programming language has different naming conventions. But there are three things that I have found that are kind of true of how values can work. First is that they should be authentic, right? Twilio has draw the owl. And maybe your team or company could, but only if it means something to you. You can't just like say, oh, this person has it and it's cool. I'm gonna use that and expect it to sit well. Second is it has to be actionable. So when there's a decision that needs to be made, when something goes wrong, the values have to be able to help decide what happens. Algolia is trying to figure out what content to have at their conference. Humility is something that can help them figure that out. And lastly, they should be aspirational. If your values just are always met, are they really causing you to be better? Are they really challenging you to do things differently than how they would just be naturally? And so that authentic, actionable, and aspirational values, I think, is what we're all trying to strive towards. The next story I want to tell you is the one during the ice storm. And this is a story about rituals, symbols, and heroes. So if values are kind of the words that we use to describe our culture and help bring it to life, the rituals, symbols, and heroes are how people experience that culture. They're tangible ways that people see culture every day. And so one organization that I love and I've been able to be a part of is called Startup Bus. And to the point of naming things, it's like a startup weekend on a bus. So the name is great for me because it's very clear. And a few years back, I had the privilege of leading the bus out of my hometown, Kansas City, Missouri. So you get a group of developers and designer and entrepreneurs on a bus, and you drive over 3 days as they build startups. And the first day went great. The second day we're in Arkansas. And one of the things I didn't know about Arkansas is it doesn't often have ice storms. But this day it did have an ice storm. And because they don't often have ice storms, the highways weren't clear. They didn't have like the tools to clear the highways. And so my Dolly prompt was this illustration of bus stuck in traffic on an icy road. And this was us for hours. But one of the rituals we had on Startup Bus was practicing your pitch. You say, who wants to pitch, right? Who wants to pitch every time there's downtime? So suddenly we're stuck on this icy road. It's kind of worst case scenario for all of us that organized it. But then people just start saying, who wants to pitch? Who wants to pitch? And people start like one-upping each other because of the situation, trying to make it more fun and lighten the mood. And this ritual of pitching, right? It created this outlet for when things were going wrong. And one of my favorite things is one of the startups was around like kind of activities that you could do with your company. And suddenly like people are running through the aisles of the bus. It's like a tour bus, kind of like a Greyhound, like doing these different activities, and the energy is just frenetic. And it was so amazing because it should have been such a like sad moment, but the ritual of practicing your pitch unlocked the culture to be something different. And I was just like thinking about, what are the rituals that we all probably have some kind of? There's onboarding, there's all hands meetings, there's stand-ups, there's code reviews, there's sprint demos, right? Like these rituals are already happening, whether we're designing them or not, right? Like just the nature of business. The symbols, right? It's probably more unique to your team or company. Like at Twilio, we have a big thing about customer shoes. So we have shoes everywhere. So we have a red track jacket you get for building a Twilio app. And I mentioned draw the owl. So there's owls, but those symbols, they should be unique to your team or company. And lastly, heroes. I think that generally can be people in your community, your customers, the internal individuals and teams. And as you think about these, for values, there are like these three sets of things that I thought were really important. For rituals and symbols and heroes, I think the most important thing is being intentional, right? Don't let these things just happen. Be thoughtful about how you're using them. Make sure they're being inclusive, especially in a remote world, right? Where people some may be in person, some may not. Ask yourself, like, who's being left out in our heroes and our symbols and our rituals, right? And ask yourself, are we celebrating the behaviors we actually want to encourage throughout all of these things? And that intentionality is the key here. The last story I want to tell is the one about my dad. So this is a story about personal choices. So we've talked about, how you can bring your values to life as part of your culture. We talked about the real tangible experiences through ritual symbols and heroes. But ultimately, culture is a bunch of personal choices individuals make. So this is my dad and I. If he and I both look a little awkward or not that stoked, this is about 3 days after we found out he had stage 4 cancer. I flew home to see him, and this was our breakfast to talk about it. And about 9 months after this, my dad passed away. And at his funeral, and this is just like unrelated to anything we're talking about. If you're ever at a funeral for someone, and you want to support someone, the best thing you can do is just share stories with the person about the loved one they lost. And I was lucky enough that my dad had a coworker who pulled me aside and did this. And I had heard my dad's version of the story, but he filled in some color of that. And so the story goes that my dad worked at a company. They were acquired. My dad was the GM, and the new company that acquired them brought everyone together and said, we are so happy you're part of the team. We can't wait to, build the future of this company together, and, stay tuned for what comes next. So that was the morning. And they took my dad out to lunch, and they said, we're going to fire everyone except you. We want to keep you. We're going to shut everything down and just take the customers and move it to a different city. And my dad was so upset. He actually went home and said, I'm gonna quit, right? Like, I don't want to work for people like this. But after sleeping on it, he said, if I quit, I can't help the people I've been serving as a leader for decades. And so what he did instead is he said, I'm going to stay. I'm going to tell these people I don't want to work for them, but I'll help the transition. And then I'm going to commit to every person that's losing their job that I'm going to help them find a job before I find my next job. And that is what he did. And that's the story that someone shared with me was, how encouraged people were as they were going through that rough time, because they knew they had someone in their corner who wasn't going to leave them behind. And he said, this could have been one of the worst moments of people's lives. And for many, it was an awful moment, but having an advocate help them get through it. And that's the personal choice that makes a culture bigger than a company, the company that bought them, that spilled out into the way that those people all lived their lives and worked after that experience. So those are three stories or experiences I've had. I'd encourage y'all to do a few things with these. First is with values. If you're part of a team that's defining these, if you have these, right, like ask yourself, like, are they specific enough? Do they pass that, variable name tests that we all go through as developers, right? Are they authentic? Are they aspirational? Are they actionable? And if they're not, do the work to figure that out, because people are going to come in and they're going to get tripped up because you don't have that. Or if you're, looking for a company to work at, you can use their values as a compass to figure out if they're the company you want to work for. And so be intentional about where you're going to work, what their values are. Second, on ritual symbols and heroes, just be intentional. Make a list, just kind of like I did. What are the rituals that are going on? What are the symbols? What are the heroes? Do you feel like those are the right things? Do you feel like they're going well? Are there things you can do better? And then lastly, hold yourself accountable on the personal choices, but also find people that you can trust to talk those through. These personal choices are hard because they're not obvious, easy answers. And so having a community of people when you have to face these choices is so critical. I will volunteer myself. If you ever want to chat culture stuff, I'm Ricky at Twilio.com. So that's RACKY at Twilio.com. But there's also, plenty of other places you can go to find your people and just be intentional about having these conversations with them. Thank you so much for having me and taking the time to listen. Like I said, I'm Ricky at Twilio.com. You can always reach out to me on email or Twitter or LinkedIn. And I hope you enjoy the rest of DevCon. Thanks.